In the endless Texas plains where wind carries both dust and dreams, two wounded souls discover that love isn't found in comfort, but forged in fire and courage to begin again. The Texas wind howled across the endless prairie, carrying dust through the abandoned settlements like whispers of forgotten dreams. Adelaide Thornton stood on her porch, weathered hands gripping the wooden rail as she watched the sun bleed crimson across the horizon. 28 years had passed since Nathan's laughter last echoed across the Golden Horseshoe Ranch. The Apache war party had taken more than her husband. They'd stolen her future, leaving her with nothing but memories and the weight of solitude that pressed down like the oppressive heat of summer. Before we jump back in, tell us where you are tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you are subscribed because tomorrow I have saved something extra special for you. Tonight was different. As moonlight painted the yard silver, strange sounds drifted from the stable. The nervous whinnying of horses, the rustle of hay, a muffled groan that didn't belong to any animal. Adelaide's hand found Nathan's old Colt revolver, its familiar weight both comfort and burden. Her heart hammered as she stepped into the cool night air, bare feet silent on the hard-packed earth. Whatever disturbed the peace of her sanctuary would face the same steel resolve that had kept her alive through 28 years of widowhood. The stable door stood slightly ajar, darkness spilling out like spilled ink. Adelaide pushed the stable door wider, moonlight spilling across scattered hay and restless horses. There, collapsed against Thunder's stall, lay a man. His clothes torn and bloodied, dark hair matted with sweat and dirt. His breathing came in shallow gasps, each exhale a whispered prayer to whatever gods watched over wanderers in the night. Fresh wounds crisscrossed his arms and torso, telling stories of recent violence. Despite every instinct screaming danger, Adelaide couldn't leave a soul to die alone in the darkness. She'd seen too much death, buried too many dreams beneath Texas soil to ignore suffering when it found her doorstep. "Mister, can you hear me?" she whispered, kneeling beside the stranger. His eyes fluttered open, steel gray like storm clouds, holding depths of pain that echoed her own. "Ezekiel," he managed through cracked lips, his voice barely audible above the horse's nervous shuffling. Ezekiel Hunter. Blood seeped through his shirt where someone's blade had found its mark. Adelaide pressed her shawl against the worst wound, feeling his life pulse warm and urgent beneath her fingers. This broken man carried secrets in his eyes, stories written in scars and shadow. Whatever brought him to her sanctuary, fate had delivered him into hands that understood healing born from hurt. With strength born of necessity, Adelaide managed to half-carry, half-drag Ezekiel across the moonlit yard. Each step sent fresh blood seeping through his clothes, painting dark trails on her nightgown. Inside the cabin, she cleared Nathan's old bed with trembling hands, trying not to think how long it had been since another human presence filled this space. Flying Deer, the old Apache woman who'd taught her healing ways despite the blood between their peoples, had shown her which herbs drew poison from wounds, which roots fought fever's fire. Adelaide's fingers worked with practiced precision, cleaning torn flesh, brewing willow bark tea for the pain that would come with consciousness. Dawn crept through the windows as Adelaide maintained her vigil, damp cloth cooling Ezekiel's fevered brow. His breathing had steadied, color slowly returning to lips that had been blue with shock. In sleep, the harsh lines of suffering softened, revealing a face that might have been handsome before pain carved its story there. "Who are you?" she whispered to the silent room. "What demons chase you across my land?" As if hearing her question, his eyes opened briefly, focusing on her face with surprising clarity. "Thank you," he whispered. Then darkness claimed him again, leaving Adelaide alone with racing thoughts and the certain knowledge that her quiet world would never be the same. The thunder of hoofbeats shattered the morning calm, 5 riders cresting the hill like harbingers of judgment. Adelaide's heart hammered as she grabbed Nathan's Winchester, positioning herself at the window where she could see the approaching strangers. Dust clouds billowed behind their horses as they rode hard toward the ranch, their faces grim beneath weathered hat brims. Fear mingled with relief when the lead rider raised his hand in peaceful greeting, rather than drawing iron. These weren't the usual drifters or cattle rustlers who sometimes plagued isolated homesteads. Something in their bearing spoke of purpose, of men bound by loyalty deeper than blood. Ma'am, name's Jedediah Cross, the leader called out, dismounting with practiced ease. His companions remained mounted but relaxed, hands visible and away from their weapons. We're looking for a friend of ours. Goes by Ezekiel Hunter. Trail led us here. Adelaide studied their faces, reading the genuine concern etched in weather-beaten features. These weren't bounty hunters or lawmen. They carried themselves like soldiers, with the easy camaraderie of men who'd shared campfires and battles. He's inside, she said simply, lowering the rifle. Been hurt bad, but he's alive. Relief flooded Cross's face like sunrise after the darkest night. Inside the cabin, Ezekiel's eyes fluttered open as his friends gathered around the bed. Zeke, you ornery son of a gun, Cross whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Thought we'd lost you for sure this time. The wounded man managed a weak smile. Takes more than a few bullets to put me down, Jed. You know that. Adelaide watched the reunion from the doorway, witnessing bonds forged in fire and tested by time. These men had served together at Fort Davis, Cross explained, before circumstances scattered them to the winds. Now they rode together by choice, brothers not by blood but by shared trials that ran deeper than family ties. Ma'am, by saving our friend, you've earned our eternal gratitude, Cross said, his hat respectfully in his hands. We take care of our own, and that now includes you. The 5 men made camp around the ranch, their presence transforming the lonely outpost into something resembling a small garrison. Adelaide felt her world expanding after years of crushing isolation, voices and laughter filling spaces that had known only silence. That evening, as she served stew to the grateful men, she caught Ezekiel watching her with eyes that held more than gratitude. Something had shifted between them, an understanding that transcended words, promising that neither would face the wilderness alone again. By the crackling fireplace, with shadows dancing on weathered walls, Ezekiel finally found strength to speak his truth. I was sheriff of Buffalo Fork, he began, his voice carrying the weight of lost honor. Wore the star with pride for 3 years, believing justice meant something in this God-forsaken territory. Adelaide poured bitter coffee into chipped cups, her silence encouraging him to continue. The coal company had plans, dirty money, dirtier deeds. When I wouldn't play along with their schemes, they made me the scapegoat. His fingers traced the scar along his jaw, a permanent reminder of betrayal. Corrupt officials painted me as the villain in their crimes. They said I took bribes, skimmed money from town coffers, even accused me of murder, Ezekiel continued, his gray eyes reflecting the firelight like steel in a forge. Had witnesses willing to swear I was guilty of sins I'd spent my life fighting against. Adelaide's weathered hands stayed steady as she passed him the coffee, her face showing no judgment, only the kind of understanding born from her own struggles. The star I wore with such pride became a target on my back. Had to run or face a rope with my name on it. The admission hung between them like smoke, heavy with the taste of injustice and broken dreams. 5 years I've been running, Ezekiel whispered, staring into the flames as if they held answers to questions that plagued his sleepless nights. Every town, every trail, always looking over my shoulder for bounty hunters or lawmen who believed the lies. Adelaide set down her cup, her voice soft but firm when she finally spoke. I know the look of a man destroyed by others' sins. You carry honor in your bearing, Ezekiel Hunter, whatever those vultures claimed. Their eyes met across the small space, 2 wounded souls recognizing the scars that time and betrayal had carved deep. In that moment, something shifted, understanding deeper than words, connection forged in shared pain. The bounty hunters are still coming, Ezekiel said, his voice heavy with regret. Being here puts you in danger, Mrs. Thornton. I should ride on come morning, take my troubles elsewhere. Adelaide's response surprised them both with its fierce conviction. This land has seen enough blood, enough running. If trouble comes calling, we'll face it together. Outside, the wind howled across the prairie, but inside the cabin, warmth grew between 2 people who had forgotten what it meant to not face the world alone. When their fingers touched reaching for the coffee pot, neither pulled away. The connection sparked like flint on steel, promising that whatever darkness pursued them, they would meet it standing side by side. The Golden Horseshoe Ranch transformed into a fortress as darkness fell, every window becoming a gun port, every shadow a potential hiding place. Ezekiel's men took positions with military precision. Cross behind the water trough, Miller in the barn loft, the others scattered like seasoned warriors who'd learned survival in harder schools than most men could imagine. "They're coming for the $1,000 bounty on my head," Ezekiel told Adelaide grimly, checking his ammunition. "These aren't lawmen. They're hired killers who will burn everything down to collect their blood money." Adelaide clutched her Winchester, feeling the weight of impending violence settle over her sanctuary like a death shroud. The attack came with the new moon, muzzle flashes blooming like deadly flowers in the darkness. Gunfire erupted from the tree line, bullets splintering wood and shattering glass as bounty hunters pressed their assault. "Stay low," Ezekiel shouted, returning fire from the front porch while Adelaide found her courage at the bedroom window. Her Winchester spoke with deadly precision, each shot carefully aimed at the shadows creeping closer to her home. The acrid smell of gunpowder filled the air, mixing with the dust kicked up by running feet and diving bodies. This was war brought to her doorstep, and she would not yield another inch of ground to those who would destroy what she'd built. Flames licked at the stable walls as one of the attackers threw a torch, the dry hay catching fire with terrifying speed. "Thunderbolt!" Adelaide cried, seeing Nathan's prize stallion trapped in the burning structure. Without hesitation, she abandoned her position, racing across the bullet-swept yard toward the inferno. Smoke burned her lungs as she fought to reach the panicked horse, flames reaching for her with greedy fingers. The roof beams groaned overhead, ready to collapse at any moment. She could hear Ezekiel shouting her name, but her focus narrowed to the frightened animal that represented her last connection to happier days. Freedom was only steps away when the timber began to fall. Strong arms swept Adelaide from the collapsing stable as the roof crashed down in a cascade of sparks and burning debris. Ezekiel held her tight against his chest, both of them coughing from the smoke as Thunderbolt galloped to safety in the yard. "You crazy brave woman," he whispered fiercely, his voice rough with emotion and relief. Around them, the gunfire was dying down. Cross's military tactics had broken the attackers' resolve, sending survivors fleeing into the night. Dawn painted the sky pink and gold as Adelaide and Ezekiel stood among the smoldering ruins, their clothes singed and faces streaked with soot. They had survived their baptism of fire together, and something fundamental had changed between them in those desperate hours. Ashes and charred timber served as grim reminders of the night's violence, but Adelaide and Ezekiel worked side by side as the sun climbed higher. Each board they hammered into place rebuilt more than walls. It strengthened the bond forged in fire and sealed with courage. "Never thought I'd find peace again," Ezekiel confessed, wiping sweat from his brow. Adelaide handed him another nail, their fingers brushing briefly. "Peace isn't found, Ezekiel. It's built one day at a time, with steady hands and patient hearts." The sound of hammering rang across the prairie like a declaration of defiance against those who would destroy hope. As they worked through the afternoon heat, Ezekiel shared the burden he'd carried alone for 5 long years. "There were nights I thought about ending it all," he admitted, his voice barely audible above the wind. "Seemed easier than running forever, looking over my shoulder, never knowing who to trust." Adelaide set down her tools, studying his weathered face with eyes that held no judgment. "But you didn't give up. Something kept you fighting." He met her gaze, seeing strength that matched his own. "Maybe I was waiting to find something worth living for." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning neither dared voice yet. Evening found them sitting by the rebuilt fireplace, sharing quiet conversation as shadows lengthened across the floor. Adelaide spoke of Nathan for the first time in years, her voice soft with remembered love. "He was a dreamer, always planning grand adventures we'd never take. But he made this place feel like the center of the world." Ezekiel listened without interruption, understanding that sharing these memories was a gift of trust. "He sounds like a good man," he said simply. "He was, and he'd want me to be happy again." The firelight danced between them, illuminating 2 hearts learning to beat in harmony after years of solitary rhythm. Under a canopy of stars that seemed close enough to touch, they stood together on the porch they'd rebuilt with their own hands. "This feels like home," Ezekiel whispered, the admission surprising them both. Adelaide felt her heart flutter like a trapped bird finally finding an open cage. "It could be," she replied, her voice carrying years of lonely nights and hopes she'd thought buried forever. When he took her hand, calloused fingers intertwining with hers. The simple touch spoke of promises yet unspoken. The Golden Horseshoe Ranch had become more than land and buildings. It was sanctuary for two wounded souls who'd found healing in each other's presence. The messenger rode hard across the scorching afternoon, his horse lathered with sweat and foam. Dust clouds marked his approach long before he reached the rebuilt porch of the Golden Horseshoe. Message from Marshal Clarence Stillwater in Tombstone, he panted, thrusting a sealed envelope toward Adelaide with trembling hands. The official wax seal bore the territorial government's mark, lending weight to whatever ultimatum lay within. Ezekiel emerged from the barn, his hand instinctively moving to his gun belt as he read the tension in the messenger's posture. Bad news traveled fast in this territory, and official correspondence rarely brought anything but trouble. Adelaide's face paled as she read the marshal's demands aloud. Ezekiel Hunter will vacate this territory within 7 days or face the full force of territorial law. His presence disrupts the peace and order we've established. The message was clear as desert sky. 30 armed deputies would ride from Tombstone if Ezekiel didn't surrender or flee. They don't want justice, Ezekiel said grimly, crumpling the paper in his fist. They want control. My presence threatens their monopoly on law in these parts. The messenger shifted nervously, clearly eager to depart before becoming entangled in whatever storm was brewing between the ranch and Tombstone's authority. I won't run again, Ezekiel declared, his voice carrying the finality of a man who'd reached his limit. Adelaide stood beside him, her chin raised in defiance that matched his own. This is our land now. We've bled for it, built on it, made it sacred with our sweat and sacrifice. Cross and the others gathered around, their faces grim but resolute. 30 against 6, Miller observed pragmatically. Been worse odds before, Cross replied with a wolfish grin. They began preparing defenses, checking ammunition, reinforcing positions. If Tombstone wanted a fight, they'd give them one that would echo across the territory for years to come. As the sun set on their ultimatum, Adelaide and Ezekiel sat together on the porch steps, sharing the weight of impossible choices. We could still leave, he offered quietly, though his tone suggested he'd rather face hellfire than abandon their hard-won sanctuary. Run to Mexico, start fresh somewhere beyond their reach. Adelaide's response came without hesitation. I buried one good man in this soil. I won't dishonor his memory by fleeing from bullies and cowards. Under the emerging stars, they made their peace with tomorrow's violence, knowing that sunrise might bring either freedom or death. Their hands found each other in the darkness, two hearts beating as one. The cold morning brought Marshal Stillwater and his army of 30 gunmen across the prairie like a plague of locusts descending on fresh crops. Their badges gleamed in the early light, but Adelaide saw nothing lawful in their approach. Only the swagger of men, drunk on power and the promise of easy violence. This is your final warning, Hunter. Stillwater's voice carried across the yard like thunder before a storm. Surrender now and face trial, or we'll drag your corpse back to Tombstone. Adelaide took her position at the eastern window, Winchester loaded and ready. Beside her, Ezekiel checked his ammunition one last time, his face calm as carved stone. I've faced your kind of justice before, Marshal, Ezekiel called back, stepping onto the porch with hands resting easy on his gun belt. Seen how you twist the law to serve your own ends? The answer is no. Stillwater's patience cracked like ice in spring thaw. Then you've chosen death, you fool. Boys, take him alive if you can, dead if you must. The marshal's hand dropped toward his weapon, but Adelaide's voice cut through the tension like a blade through silk. This is my land, Marshal. You have no authority here unless you're prepared to kill an innocent woman for defending her home. Her words carried the weight of absolute conviction. The first gunshot shattered the morning stillness like breaking glass, and suddenly the air filled with the thunder of 30 weapons firing in deadly chorus. Bullets splintered the porch railings and punched holes through window frames as Ezekiel dove for cover behind the water trough. Adelaide's Winchester answered from her bedroom window, each shot carefully aimed at the advancing lawman. They're flanking left, Cross shouted from the barn, his rifle speaking with practiced precision. The battle had become a symphony of violence, each side testing the other's resolve. Smoke drifted across the yard like morning fog, carrying the acrid smell of gunpowder and spilled blood. Through the chaos of flying lead and shouted commands, Adelaide found herself caught in the deadly dance she'd only heard described in Nathan's war stories. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness, loading and firing with mechanical precision, while her heart hammered against her ribs like a caged bird. Ezekiel fought with the skill of a man who'd survived 5 years of running battles, each movement calculated and deadly. "Hold fast," he called to his men. "They're testing our defenses." A stray bullet shattered the window beside Adelaide's head, showering her with glass, but she never flinched. This was her stand, her moment to prove that some things were worth dying for. The ranch house shuddered under the relentless barrage of bullets, but its defenders held their ground with desperate determination. Ezekiel moved between positions like a phantom, his years of survival training evident in every calculated shot. Despite his old wounds tearing open with each movement, he coordinated the defense with military precision. "They're concentrating fire on the front," he shouted to Cross. "Miller, watch the barn. They'll try to flank us there." Adelaide reloaded her Winchester with steady hands, though her heart raced like a Mustang running wild. Each shot she fired carried 28 years of solitude and pain, transformed now into fierce protection of the life she'd rebuilt. From her bedroom window, Adelaide saw Marshal Stillwater directing his men with the arrogance of a man accustomed to easy victories. But this wasn't some frightened homesteader or broken-down drifter. This was a woman defending sacred ground. Her Winchester spoke again, the bullet catching one of his deputies in the shoulder and spinning him to the dirt. "That's for thinking you could take what we've bled for," she called out, her voice carrying across the gunfire. The marshal's face twisted with rage as he realized his overwhelming numbers weren't guaranteeing the quick victory he'd expected. These weren't ordinary settlers. They were warriors who'd already proven their mettle. The tide turned when Ezekiel's keen eye found Marshal Stillwater through the shifting smoke and chaos. The corrupt lawman was shouting orders, confident in his position behind a wagon. But Ezekiel had been fighting for his life for 5 years, and his aim was true as gospel. The shot rang out like divine judgment, catching Stillwater center mass and dropping him like a felled tree. A stunned silence fell over the attackers as their leader crumpled to the earth, his badge reflecting the morning sun. "Your marshal's down," Cross bellowed triumphantly. "Any man still shooting will join him." The fight went out of Stillwater's hired guns faster than air from a punctured lung. Adelaide emerged onto her bullet-scarred porch with Winchester raised, her nightgown torn and stained with smoke and sweat. She looked like an avenging angel descended from frontier legend, her eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Get off my land," she commanded, her voice carrying absolute authority. "Take your dead and wounded and ride back to whatever hole spawned you." The surviving deputies scrambled for their horses, their arrogance replaced by the bitter taste of defeat. As dust clouds marked their retreat, Adelaide and Ezekiel stood together among the wreckage, bloodied but unbroken. They had won more than a battle. They had claimed their right to happiness through trial by fire. In the weeks following their hard-won victory, the Golden Horseshoe Ranch rose from ashes like a phoenix reborn. Adelaide and Ezekiel worked side by side from dawn to dusk, building more than new structures. They were crafting a future together. The bullet holes in the walls became reminders of their courage, battle scars that spoke of love worth fighting for. Cross and his men helped rebuild the barn, their hammering echoing across the prairie like a song of renewal. "Never thought I'd see the day when this place felt alive again," Adelaide confessed as they shared coffee on their restored porch. Ezekiel's smile held promises of tomorrows filled with laughter and hope. News of Stillwater's defeat spread through the territory like wildfire, and slowly, tentatively, the people of Tombstone began to make peace. Farmers left tools and grain by the ranch gates, silent offerings of respect for those who'd stood against tyranny. The blacksmith brought horseshoes, the doctor left medicine, and even the preacher rode out to offer his blessing on their union. "They're afraid," Ezekiel observed, watching another delegation depart. "Afraid of what we represent? That ordinary people can stand up to corruption and win." Adelaide smiled, her hand finding his. "Let them be afraid. Fear of justice keeps honest men honest and makes cowards think twice about their choices." As autumn painted the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson, Ezekiel found the courage to speak words that had been building in his heart like water behind a dam. Adelaide, I want to stay forever. Not just until the next trouble comes, not just until I feel safe again. Forever. Her eyes filled with tears that caught the sunset light like precious gems. This place was dying before you came. Nathan's memory deserves better than a monument to loneliness. They stood together where her husband's grave marked the eastern boundary, paying respect to the past while embracing the future. He'd want me to be happy again, she whispered. And you make me happier than I ever dreamed possible. Under the vast Texas sky, studded with stars that seemed close enough to touch, Adelaide and Ezekiel shared their first kiss as the Golden Horseshoe Ranch hummed with new life around them. The kiss tasted of coffee and dreams, of battles survived and love discovered in the most unlikely circumstances. I never believed in second chances, Ezekiel whispered against her hair. Thought I was destined to run forever, never finding peace. Adelaide's response came soft but certain. The best stories aren't about easy paths, Ezekiel. They're about courage to begin again. Their union was forged in fire and tempered by trials, proving that the strongest love grows not from comfort, but from the shared determination to build something beautiful from the ashes of the past.